I'm a member of this incredible co-working space, the Impact Guild. Thank you so much to Sarah Woolsey back there in blue for generously hosting us. If you have any questions about the space, I would encourage you to talk to her afterwards. If you've never been here, there's a bathroom right around the corner. A few more back there. Props to the Impact Guild, they're all gender neutral all the time. Also a big thank you to DreamWeek for asking us to host this event. I'll be honest, my strength is in writing, not public speaking, so please bear with me. I'm the founder of the blog Profiles in Pride, which I launched in November. It's dedicated to sharing the stories of real LGBTQIA people through interviews. I started the blog because I've been a professional writer for a decade, and my favorite types of pieces to both read and write are profiles of people. These human interest stories will really draw us in and change hearts and minds. I've had the chance to write profiles of amazing prominent people for Out in SA, our local LGBT magazine, but as I began getting more involved in the community, I encountered so many moving stories from, quote, regular people who would never be featured in a traditional publication. I decided I wanted a platform where I could share anyone's story, regardless of job title or social media followers. The strength and bravery that all LGBTQIA people must have to simply be themselves, and the sacrifices and struggles so many overcome blow me away. I respect it so much now that I've gone through it myself in the last 2 years. I also began noticing many of the common threads we all share. Our journeys all look very different, but tend to follow a similar story arc. We first have to come to terms with our own identity. Grappling with this is often the hardest part. Then we get to the tipping point where we decide the risks of coming out are worth it, and we start sharing who we are with the world. Then, if all goes well, we learn to fully accept ourselves and cultivate a sense of pride. Some people find this early on, but while for others it takes a lifetime. But those who are on the other side serve as a source of strength and inspiration to those who are still trying to come to terms with their identity, or are trying to find the strength to come out. Profiles in Pride is a place where these stories can provide hope, encouragement, empowerment, inspiration, and community to other LGBTQ people. It's also a place where allies and others outside the community can learn about our journeys and develop a greater sense of compassion and understanding. Sometimes seeing a human face and story helps people see beyond a headline or label. I truly believe these stories can change the world. In the name of sharing stories, just a little about my own journey. I've been bisexual my whole life, but for most of it, I was too scared to be out. I came from a very liberal home, but I felt a mix of shame and confusion, and I didn't want to cause drama or be, quote, different. I just wanted to be normal, whatever the hell that means, so I found it easier to keep that side of myself hidden, which is a privilege I understand that many LGBTQ people do not have. I dated women in secret and was primarily partnered with men, so it was easy to hide. I'm almost 33 and really only started coming out to friends and family a little less than 2 years ago, following a shift in my sexuality that left me feeling more attracted to women than men, and following some major life events that shook me up and helped me see that life was too short to be lived in the closet. One of those life-altering events was suddenly losing my beloved father just 2 months after being diagnosed with terminal cancer. This staggering loss threw me into a tailspin, leaving me questioning everything in my life, but it also helped give me the courage to live more fully and finally put all of myself out there, despite the risks of judgment and rejection. Thankfully, I've been mostly met with love and support. I've made a lot of life changes in the last few years. I came out to all of my friends and family, something I never thought I would do in my entire life. I went to my first Pride Festival, which gave me such a sense of belonging. I left a marriage to a man that was no longer working for me, which was incredibly difficult for both of us. I left an unfulfilling job for the life of a full-time freelancer, which is a risky thing to do, but has always been my dream. Recently, I've gone public about dating a woman for the first time. My journey to authenticity has been painful, emotional, challenging, exhausting, transformative, terrifying, and gratifying, all at once. I mistakenly thought coming out would be the hardest part, but dealing with all the resulting changes and identity shifts has been harder than expected. I'm still very much a work in progress, but I'm growing, finding a strength I never knew I had, and finding a sense of relief, knowing that I can be whoever I want to be and date whoever I want to date, and my family and friends will still love and support me. My partner, Jamie, sitting right there, is a trans woman whose courage and bravery inspires me every day. I met her at the beginning of her transition, and she and I have supported each other along our journeys of finding and expressing our truth. I hope you can stay for the second hour to see her panel on being LGBTQ in the military. The 4 people who are about to come up and speak have all been profiled on my blog, and all of their journeys have been very different. But one incredible thing they all have in common, and I actually didn't plan this, is they're all activists and advocates for LGBTQ rights in Texas in all different ways. You're about to have the treat of hearing them tell their stories in person. I don't want to give anything away, so I'll let them tell you their stories. But the speakers in order are Belinda Trevino, Julian Tovar, Alicia Roth Weigel, and Emmett Schelling. Belinda and Julian are based here in San Antonio. Alicia came here from Austin, and Emmett came in from Houston, so thank you all for taking the time to be here with us tonight. Following their stories, if there's any time, we'll have a Q&A. Then we can take a quick break before the next panel, which I hope you can stay for, which, as I mentioned, is about being LGBTQ in the military. Thank you to everyone who's here with us to learn, offer support, and embrace the journey of authenticity.
I'm not good at public speaking either, so I had to write what I had to say because I'm a girl and I ramble a lot. Thank you, Emily, for having me on your panel tonight, and I'm truly humbled and honored and thankful for this opportunity to be here amongst my peers and activists in my community. My name is Belinda Trevino. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. I was born and raised in Corpus Christi, Texas. I grew up with my 3 sisters in a single-parent home. My mom married a handsome black man that was in the Navy at 5 years old, and he became my dad at 5. I remember I wanted my mom to put oil in my hair just like my sisters because I wanted to be just like them. And she did, but I stayed Mexican, and my heart was I'll never be black, So I married shortly after high school, because that's what you were supposed to do in a Hispanic family, a woman. You're supposed to get married right out of high school and have a family. And after 15 years of being married, we looked like the perfect household, the perfect marriage. I had 3 beautiful kids, but we divorced and it just didn't work out for both of us. And after my divorce, I had my first lesbian relationship. And I don't know what was worse, going through a divorce or being with a hot-tempered woman. So I sort of, not all women are crazy, but yeah, that was my experience. But now, at 41, I found my happiness with an incredible woman who's taken my kids in and raising them as her own, and her 2 cats and her dog. Life has been pretty good for me, aside from a few bumps in the roads, but that's only half my story. I grew up in a very strict home. I was a devoted Jehovah's Witness for most of my life. I didn't know any gay people at the time growing up. So I struggled with my feelings of being attracted to other women. I just held them inside and never talked about it. We also didn't have much of a social life because all we knew was just church and home. Being Jehovah's Witness, the church didn't like for us to be influenced by the world, because it would steer us away from the religion and have our own thoughts. So I never really had career goals. I never wanted to go to college. I didn't have those kind of goals that my son and my kids now have. I was molded to be a good Christian, to be a good wife, and be a good mom, so that's what I did. And I remember in high school, my guidance counselor asked me, when I was a senior, getting ready to graduate, she says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And the first thing I said, real excitedly, I said, "I want to be a mom." Well, she looked at me like, "No, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Out of school. And I said, "I want to be a mom." That's what I really meant, I really wanted to be. So that's what I did. Shortly after high school, got married to a guy in church and started a family right away. The fall of '98, I had my firstborn, beautiful baby girl, which later on in life turned out to be my handsome son. My son right now is 19 years old. He attends Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. He's a sophomore, and he's legally registered as Robert Mason Cantu. Very proud of him. And he did that all on his own. So at that time, that point in my life, that's when everything changed for me. I thought, I've got my whole life planned ahead of me. I've got these wonderful kids, I have this family. I had no idea what was going to happen. So when my son came out to me as trans, my whole life changed, and I became an advocate for my son, and I became an advocate for the transgender community. My son was 16 years old when he came out to me, and I remember that night like it was yesterday. It was a Day of the Dead festival when I was in Corpus. I went with my daughter. She was in an all-girls band, and she was playing. My son didn't go with me. I came home, and as soon as I opened the door, I was tired. I just wanted to go to bed. I opened the door, and there stood my son tears in his eyes. And I thought, oh my God, what happened? And he says, he stood very proud. He's like, let's go for a drive. So at that moment, I knew something big was going to happen. I thought, okay, I got this. Whatever he's going to tell me, I got it. So we left, we started driving down Ocean Drive. As I'm driving, in my head, I'm going, what could he tell me? He's a great kid, straight A student, maybe the school's overwhelming him, I don't know. So as we parked, and mind you, my son is not a very emotional person. I cried for everything. He doesn't cry at all. He keeps everything inside. And he said that he felt that he was a boy, that he felt that he was not supposed to be born a girl. And how did I feel about that? So right away, I didn't know what to feel. Right away, I just said, what took you so long to tell me? I was very close to him. So what took you so long to tell me? I could have helped you a lot sooner. And he says, I don't know. I just didn't know what I was feeling. I was confused. I was nervous. I didn't know what to call it, what to tell you, to explain to you until I researched what I was feeling and I found the word transgender and it matched what I felt. So now I'm coming to you and revealing my true self. So of course, as a mom, I'm going through the whole spiel of, when I was little and my mom did this and these are my experiences. He got all mad and said, no, this is not about you, it's about me. It's what I'm feeling. So at that moment, my son taught me the act of listening. I'm a better listener now that my son is going through this. So after we talked and we hugged and cried, I thought, wow, I was just at a festival earlier, now my whole life's changed. We have to tell our family, and what are we gonna do? So we drove back home. He felt just this huge weight lifted off his shoulders. And then that's when I just told him, well, now this is about me. Is it okay for me to share our story? Because I need help. I need advice. I need to speak to another parent. I need to hug another mom. I had always been in the LGBT community, but I never was in this position where I'm helping my son be true to himself. So I always said, well, I need another Hispanic mom, because Hispanics grow up, men are real machismos, and the women sort of, we tend to our husbands, we tend to our family, that's just how we were raised. I knew my ex-husband would just flip a switch when he found out. So I wanted to talk to another family that was in my culture and find out, well, what did you do? What did you say? How did you react? So when he allowed me to share our story, I researched, LGBT organizations in Corpus, and I didn't find any that specifically worked with the transgender community. So I decided to do my own group with the help of two other friends of mine, two other trans women in Corpus. So we decided to create a group. So my journey, I called it the Be Human campaign. Mason and I chose the word be human because, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, regardless of who we are. Strip away the labels, hate, everything that, makes you, strip away all that. We're all human beings inside, no matter what we go through in life. So that's what we called it. So myself and two other girls, we created our group. They are going strong 2 years in Corpus. They meet once a week at the Coastal Bend Wellness Foundation. They help with gender and marker changes for their members. They fundraise, and they just provide resources to anybody that needs help. So after my son graduated from high school, I decided it was time for me to move on. I was born and raised in Corpus, and I wanted, to be a part of a different community, somewhere bigger. I had a yearning to learn more about who I was and who my son is and who other transgender people are going through. So we got here to San Antonio, and I went right away online, started researching LGBT organizations, and I found Unify, found HRC, and I reached out to them and wanted to be a part of any events that was happening here in San Antonio, because I wanted to partner up with them, and then also for them to know what we were about, what we started in Corpus, and hopefully I can lend a hand here in San Antonio. So when I did that, I met 2 other people. I met Eric LaRue and Ashley Brown, and we created a support group here in San Antonio. And we meet right now at Unified every last Wednesday of the month at 6:30. And we're more than a support group. We've become a very close family. And through my journey, we have an Instagram account, a Facebook, and I'm constantly getting messages from kids, especially. Because our group we're focused on families. Parents will message me online, asking me for help and resources, what kind of counselors can I go to, pretty much you name it, but I get a lot from moms and little kids. So as our group was growing, the need was growing. So we implemented some services that we provide. We started a chest binder program. So if any transitioning, female or male needs a chest binder, if they've already had their surgery, they'll donate it to us, and then we donate it to somebody who needs it. That's been going strong. A lot of kids will email me with that. And then also we started a clothing drive. It started off as a clothing swap with the intention of if somebody's transitioning, they would donate their old clothes and come in and grab what they need for their new life. But I've been gathering donations for about a year now. So I started on my garage, and then I started with a tiny unit. Now I have an 8x10 storage unit because the response from the community has been so great. It's been awesome. People have donated so much stuff. I've got wigs, clothes, shoes, polishes. I mean, you name it, anything that can help them with their transition, we have it. Because I know the expense in buying new clothes, I have to buy clothes for my son, uncomfortable going out in public if they're not comfortable shopping. So we just provide them a space to come in and get some clothes. And also this year we started the Behemoth on the Go to accommodate everybody's needs. If they can't come to us, we'll go to you. So I'll find places and ask them if they can host a swap, and they can come and get clothes, what they need. So by me sharing my story and my son's story, I want something to come out of it. You know, we can just inspire one person. That's amazing. You know, see, this is where I forget what I'm going to say. I'm like, what am I going to say? Okay, my last part. Sorry, I'm probably rambling now. There are times when I grow tired. I think I don't want to do this anymore. It's a lot to handle, and then I get a call or a message from a trans boy who needs a binder because their mom kicked him out and lives with their grandma and thinks that he's a lesbian and tells me, you're all I have. Or a phone call from someone who needs clothes and that can't afford any. As a mother, I empathize with them. I want to instill in my kids an act of giving and accepting others with love and without judgment. The moment that I was true to myself, I became happy. The moment my son was true to himself, he blossomed and he was the happiest yet I had ever seen him. I want my son's coming out story to serve a purpose. Being a trans kid in high school is tough. Being a trans adult in America and under this administration is tough. But I know that we can all get through this together. As I started this journey, it opened my eyes to a whole new world. I found others just like me, and I felt empowered. And I'm hoping that by sharing both our stories, I can inspire at least one person. We all have this one life. We don't have to live it perfectly, just live it authentically and happy. Be the best version of yourself. Be the best human being that you can be.
Hi guys, how are you? This is what it feels like to do karaoke. So good evening. Let me just start off with thanking Emily for having me here tonight on this panel. I don't often do panels, and people like Emmett know that, just because depending on the topic or the subject, there's a lot of vulnerability in it. And then the space is so intimate. It's really cool just to see everyone's faces and connect with each and every one of you. I didn't really want to prepare anything in advance because usually when I speak, I just like things to really be organic. But as I was driving here, I really thought about and reflected a lot about some of the last few days that had taken place. And full transparency, right? When I spoke with Emily and did my interview for the profile piece, I answered the questions and I kind of gave what I felt at the time, but it really triggered some thoughts to come to me that I guess over time and through self-preservation you suppress. And I started to really reflect on that a little bit more deeply. And I'd always thought that I don't really have a coming out story, and if I do, it's really probably not very unique, which is great, because I think we would all like to live in a world that is perfect and ideal, where neither one of us have to have coming out stories, where we can just be who we are and wake up each day and just live. But we don't live in an ideal or perfect world, and because of that, I think it is important to share those stories that exist and share those coming out stories, and not necessarily to emphasize who we are or our journey, but to show others that we've been down that hole before, and you can come out of it, and it is okay, and you will be okay. So as I thought about that, I really thought about the authenticity of my coming out story and really tried to dig deep to the things I had to the things that I did suppress my entire life probably. Things that you probably forget either by choice or by wanting just to forget about moments in your life that didn't feel so great. And in a way to allow you to just kind of move forward and move on. So my coming out story that I'm going to tell tonight is a little bit more deeper than probably what's profiled, or it is, than what's profiled in the piece that Emily did so well to write. And so I apologize that you're going to get a whole new version.
There you go. Bring it on.
But I felt that I would not be doing my due diligence to the people that are here in this room and to the service of my community. I came out when I was 16, and prior to really coming out and saying the words like I'm gay, and we'll get to that in a moment and how that happened, I met someone in band camp, and true story. And I was a freshman at the time, or maybe I was a sophomore at the time. He was I was a freshman at the time, and he was a junior, so he was 2 years older. Super smart guy, was the drum major of our band, so in retrospect, as I think about it, I've always been attracted to men in leadership, so that's just a thing, I guess. But he was a drum major for us during band camp, and he was tall, curly hair, good looking, and I was immediately drawn to him and his kindness, and he was also very involved in the community, and it was something that I had yet to grow into that as much as he had. So for a good while, he was someone that I looked at from a distance and just admired how he contributed to people in school and his community outside of school. And so then we eventually, did the whole, hey, I kind of like you, and kind of went through that process together of trying to figure ourselves out and go past of, this is more than a friendship, and I can obviously tell when you look at me like you're looking at me differently than you look at her. And that grew into an intimate relationship, and I was 16 at the time. And we were secretly together for about several months, 6 months. And it just became a lot to bear to keep it a secret. I wanted to tell my friends, I wanted to tell my family, but I was terrified. I was terrified because I came from a strong religious Catholic family, and every Christmas or every Catholic holiday was largely celebrated. I have 2 aunts that are nuns and an uncle that's a priest, and so those days were filled with a lot of praying and music and food and drinks and everything that takes place. So I wasn't really sure how my family was going to respond. And like a lot of people, you don't want to hurt your family. You don't want to cause any pain, and make them feel a certain way that is not good. And I didn't want to be the one to inflict that, because for so long I was the good son and I didn't do anything wrong, and I did that they knew of. I didn't do anything wrong, and I, got good grades in school and did everything I was supposed to, followed the rules. My sister was the one who always acted out, and so I thought, man, this is really going to outdo anything that she did. And I don't know how this is going to play out. And I really didn't plan on coming out. I really planned on kind of just taking it with me as long as I could without telling my parents. But one day, so funny, one day my dad was doing, if you live in a, this is, I don't know why it's always related to like Mexican culture, but if you hear the lawnmower starting outside early in the morning, you're gonna do like yard work and manual labor that day. And you only have maybe 10 more minutes to sleep in before someone comes knocking on the door and you're out there. And so that happened that morning. And I didn't want to get up. I wanted to sleep in, and I felt like I was entitled to do that because, I had done everything else so well. But that wasn't the case. My dad was ready for me to get to work. My mom was ready for me to help clean. And I wanted to leave that day to go hang out with Chris at the zoo because we were always broke, and we had a friend that worked there and would let us in for free. And I had just bought new tennis shoes from a gift card that my aunt had given me. All those things were happening that day because those are the things that are important, right? And so I got up, I put on my new shoes, and my dad comes into my room and he asked me to come outside and help. And I told him that I had plans to go with Chris, which he knew as just a friend. And he said, no, you can go outside and help until everything's done, and then you can go, do whatever you want and hang out with Chris. And I said, well, I'm leaving, I had $22 and I thought that was a lot of money, right? And so I said, I'm leaving, and usually I would ask for money before I left and they would give it to me. And I felt like, well, I don't have to ask you for money this time. I have $22, and so I can just walk my little butt outside the door and not need anything from you. And he said, it was a whole conflict, and he said, you're not leaving, who the hell do you think you are? And I said, I don't want to be here, I don't want to help you. And I think I said the words, you can go to hell. And never had reached a point of like such anger with my parents ever. And so he was taken aback by it. My mom was not too far hearing everything happen. And she was coming into the space that we were in. And in the moment that I told my dad that he could go to hell, he grabbed me by my throat and pushed me into the wall. And that hole is still there, although he's tried to cover it up with a photo and whatnot. But as all that was happening simultaneously, I just yelled out, because I needed a reaction from him. I needed to get him just to snap and stop. And I said, I'm gay. And I yelled it. And everything did stop. He let go. I helped myself out of the wall. And my mom was standing right behind my dad. And my dad, immediately said in Spanish, "Don't be stupid, you're not gay." And I said, "I am gay." I said, "I am gay, Chris is my," I let it all out. I was like, "I am gay, Chris is my boyfriend, I love him. I've been staying over at his house and not Veronica's house because it was safe to stay at Veronica's house for whatever reason." Because they always knew. And he said, he told my mom, he said, "I don't know what he's talking about. If he's gay, he's your son, not mine." And he left the room. And my mom said, she was like, "What happened?" She's like, "All he asked you to do was go outside and help him cut the lawn." And I remember my mom storming off to where my dad was, and she says, "Just stay in your room and don't go anywhere and be quiet." And I hear my parents arguing, and I hear my mom say, "So what if he's gay?" And my dad say, "I always knew he was gay, but I didn't want him to be gay while he was living with us." And my mom said, "Well then, we'll send him somewhere else to go live." And I did. I went to go live with my aunt down the road. And I did that for about 3 months. But in the interim of all that happening, my parents felt like they could try to fix it for the moment. And they took me to the doctor, so I got the drug test, I got the blood test, and it was the first time that the doctor came in and said, "You know, your parents want you to do this kind of blood test for HIV." And I said, "Okay, I guess, I don't even really know what that means, but it sounds like you're asking me to do it, I'll do it." I had nothing to hide. And that took place one day, and then the next day, we were going to a therapist and trying to see the therapist, and the therapist was like, "There's nothing wrong with your son other than the fact that he's gay, and you guys are gonna have to work through these issues." And they weren't getting the answers that they wanted, thankfully, from the professionals that we were seeing. And that was probably my saving grace at the moment, because they just sent me over to my aunt's house, who was very understanding, embraced me for the rest of that school year. I could not have any access to my friends until my parents slowly came back around, wanted me back at home. I think quickly realized that, you know, as a family unit, it just wasn't the same without me in the home. And so I went back, and our conversations were very limited. It was very good morning, good night. I would go to school, do what I needed to do, come back. And that went on for the rest of my high school years until my senior year. I moved out and I moved in with Chris. We had what one would consider like the greatest relationship, because you didn't have any parents, you were living, you know, in your own apartment. But in telling my story, I recognize that even that is not comparable to some of the struggles and the challenges that others have gone through. And that's not lost on me. And the reason that I participate as an activist or an advocate in the community is because I hear the stories of other people's challenges. I hear the stories of being kicked out of their family for forever and with no acceptance to come back. I get the phone calls, you know, in the roles that we do, we get the phone calls in the middle of the night of someone seeking help or needing to talk to somebody and just wanting to share their story. And so it's not lost on me that my experience, although difficult at the moment in those times and something that I thought I would not survive, I did. And so I really pull from that when someone else is telling me that they're going through something similar. And there was a point that I felt guilty that I, you know, kind of hid that piece, because you also never want your family to look bad, right? And the truth is, though, that, you know, they didn't know any better. And I'm a strong believer in and I just said this earlier today, when you know better, you do better. And they now know better, and they've done really great understanding my life now and being accepting and understanding of everything that's actually happened. And through love and through changing hearts and minds of themselves, they've educated themselves on, what it does actually mean to be LGBT, and in fact that there's not a big deal to them. And they've embraced that piece of me and my friends and my, people that I've been in relationships with. And so I tell that story because I think others, and I know of others that have gone through the same path and felt like they could not come out of it, and carried such a burden that they took their own life, or they shut down in such a way that they no longer showed up to work, no longer were participating in society. And then you have those that, really just stop living their authentic life and are not happy. And you can almost see it in their face and see it in who they are every day. And those are the people that I still carry with me to do the work that I do, because like Belinda and everyone else on the panel, the work is not easy. And nobody wants to be an activist. Nobody comes out saying, I want to be an advocate or an activist. We end up being an activist or an advocate because we're forced to do so. And we're forced to do that, if not for ourselves, for others. And so I'm way over my time, I'm so sorry. I thought I didn't have anything to say. I'll just leave you with, if there's anything that you go on to do, LGBT related or not, I think the best thing that we can do as a community, as a society, is always what I consider is the common denominator amongst a lot of people, and that's just, do you hear me? Do you see me? Is what I'm saying, important to you? And take that with some compassion. Thank you guys. Have a good night.
Hey everyone, my name is Alicia, and something that Julian said stuck with me, which is, as he was revisiting his story, like he remembered new things and new things became apparent and clear to him, and I think that's very true for me as well. And so I'm going to tell my story in a bit of a roundabout way and start with my experience of coming out, and then go back and revisit what that taught me about myself and living authentically and helping other people do so. So skipping right to the meat of it, I have lived a lot of places. I've lived in 4 different countries on 3 different continents within the United States. I've lived on the West Coast, on the East Coast, now in Texas. Worked a lot of different types of jobs, worked with a lot of different types of people, and I think that all of that, I had my reasons for all of it, but in hindsight, I think a lot of it was like searching for something that really was inside myself that had just never really come out and been able to come out and be authentic. And now that it has, I feel very rooted here in Texas, and that this is where it's my calling to be and where my community is, and why I want to share my story. So after kind of this winding path, I ended up here in Texas working for an advocacy training organization called Deeds Not Words, founded by former State Senator Wendy Davis. And through that work, we train high school and college students how to tell their own story and able to advocate for communities that they care about, and improve the lives of others by helping to kind of break stigma and spread understanding, but also to help better understand themselves, heal themselves, and empower themselves through what they've been through. So through that work, I helped hundreds of high school and college age women come forward with really difficult experiences that they've been through, from human trafficking to you name it. And in order to do that, I had shared a lot of myself too. A lot of the work that we've done in terms of legislative advocacy has been in the realm of sexual assault and preventing women from violence. And so through that, I came forward with my own story of sexual assault, which was hard. But throughout all of this, I felt like a huge hypocrite and felt like I wasn't doing my best work, because I was speaking to all these people and urging them to come forward and be truthful with who they were. And yet I had shared all of these different pieces of me, but there was a huge piece of me that I had not shared, and not just publicly, but with anyone really, not even with my brother or most of my best friends, or really anyone besides a couple of members of my family. And so I was at the legislature on one day during the special session this past summer when our lovely governor tried to pass a bill to discriminate against transgender people using bathrooms as a vehicle. Bathrooms have always been a vehicle in civil rights, now in trans rights. It's not about the bathrooms, it's about suppressing certain communities. But I had become friends with a lot of members of the transgender community, and we were there and we were fighting this bathroom bill. We had killed it in the regular session. We were fighting to kill it again in the special session. And I remember the day before I came out, I was at the legislature and I was hanging out with Jess Herbst, who's an amazing trans mayor here in Texas, who has had so much courage coming out and doing that work. A mutual friend of mine and Emily's, Danielle Skidmore, who's another amazing member, another amazing trans advocate. And in talking with them and hearing their story and why they were fighting for what they were fighting for, I just had this kind of light bulb moment that I could help the legislators who see people who are so unlike them and come from such a place of fear that they're not able to understand those people. And yet I'm coming from a different standpoint where they all know me, they all look at me, they see a white woman, they see me as Wendy Davis's right-hand person. That might make them hate me because a lot of people dislike Wendy Davis and the work that she's done here in Texas, but they can at least understand me and they're not scared or threatened by me in terms of how I present to the world. And yet I had this big piece of information in this way that I thought I could frame it that might help change their minds. So I decided in that afternoon, after having met with all these trans advocates, that I was going to come out as being intersex, as an intersex person, the next morning at the legislature. And so I registered online to testify, and I started messaging with Danielle, and I was like, I know I just met you today, but I'm going to do this, I need some help. And she was there. This is something that's so great about the LGBT community, is you can meet someone one day and you say you need something a couple hours later, and we're all so here for each other because we know what it's like. Whether we have the same letter in the LGBTQIA rainbow or not, there's so much support, which is amazing. So she was helping me and kind of encouraging me, and this whole time, it's the middle of the night at this point, and I'm frantically texting Wendy. I'm like, I'm gonna do this. And then Wendy, at a certain point, she goes to the bathroom, I think, and sees her frantic text messages from me, and I think calls me back at 4:30 in the morning and helps talk me through what I was going to do. And I'll back up in a minute and kind of explain the nuance of what it means to be an intersex person. But at a high level, for those people who aren't aware, being intersex means that you're born because of a chromosomal condition. You are born with biological traits that do not fit in as purely male or purely female. So for me, that means I was born with XY chromosomes, and yet I was insensitive to androgen in the womb. And so I developed phenotypically female on the outside, but I was born with, instead of ovaries, I was born with testes on the inside, and no uterus. And we'll go back and revisit a lot of what that has meant for me. But at this moment, Wendy had known that I was intersex because I had come out to her privately in a way that I had come out to very, very few people before that, but it was always in the same context, when I got really drunk and I felt really vulnerable, and I just kind of came out in this like rush of emotions. And so there was one time that Wendy and I were like in the middle of the woods in backwoods Pennsylvania, and like we were drinking beers because like what else do you do there? We were there for some event, and so I had come out to her like a while before, and so she knew. But she also knew that in the spirit of our organization that I wanted to wait and share my story until I felt that I could do it in a way that might empower others as well. And so she calls me back, jumping myself back to where I was. She calls me back at like 5 in the morning, and she's like, I'm so proud of you. And she's like, I have a suggestion for you. I said, okay. And she says, a lot of these legislators, you know, they recognize you, they know you. She goes, so Wendy also knows that I'm someone that I'm kind of like a tomboy. I don't really, unlike Wendy, like Wendy and I make fun of each other a lot because I'm always like, oh, did you get your hair done today? And she's like, oh, like, did you put on some makeup once in a while? Like, I just like, I never really do that. It's not really my thing. But she's like, I want you to wear your heels. I want you to blow out your hair. I want you to wear makeup. I want you to like wear your push-up bra if you got to do that. She's like, I want you to walk into the legislature looking as femme and female as you can, and I want you to blow those legislators' minds. And they might be thinking certain things, and I'll tell you from a bunch of other experiences I've had with GOP male legislators that they think a lot of things about me, about what they might like to do with me. And so for them, it would be really making them rethink their own attractions and their own kind of orientation and things, because what I essentially ended up coming out and doing for the first time publicly was coming out in front of the legislature as being intersex. And so I was like, you know, I have XY chromosomes. Like, I used to have balls. And they're all like, you know, you see these like old white men, they're like staring at the ground and whatever. So anyway, so the reason that I decided to come out in that context though is for a lot of those legislators, again, they see trans people come in, they see these people of color come in, they see these people that they can't relate to, that they're frankly scared of, and they just kind of turn their ears off sometimes, as messed up as that is. And so I felt, you know, I'll come in, they'll be listening, because they might not like me, but they listen to me. And so I came in with that kind of way to flip it on their heads, but also to say that for all these people, for the transgender bathroom bill specifically, which was written by Senator Lois Kolkhorst, don't get me started, and she and a lot of the rest of them who are supportive of this piece of legislation would say that they do it because we have to get away from this perverted notion of gender fluidity and go back to biological sex, because that's cut and dry. And so when I came up there, I said, hey, Lois Kolkhorst, and I called her out by name, and she's sitting right there. I'm like, actually, biological sex is not cut and dry. 2% of the world's population is born physically, in terms of genitalia, in terms of sexual reproductive organs. 2% of the entire world's population is born somewhere in between. That's 150 million people that are proving you dead wrong in your reasoning. And not only did I want to call her out to be like, you're wrong, which feels really good, but also if these people that can't wrap their mind around fluidity, whether it's in terms of gender fluidity or fluidity of sexual orientation and preferences, sometimes seeing is believing, right? And they can't deny that there are babies that are born with a penis and a vagina, or that are born with a vagina and internal testes, and that not just that it happens like once in a blue moon, that is 2% of the entire world's population that does that. So if they can admit that, and if they can see that, physically see that, then if there are people who are born with physical traits that are somewhere in between, and there's a spectrum of physical traits, then why would it not make sense as a follow-up that those people might not identify as purely male or female? And so, or that they might be attracted to a variety of types of people because they were born as something in between themselves. And so if you're able to see it physically, and as I said, seeing is believing, maybe they'll be able to backtrack a minute and understand that, you know, gay people exist, trans people exist. This is not something that's going away. It's not something you can legislate out of. But unfortunately for the intersex community, it's something that doctors are trying to operate their way out of. my testes were removed when I was a child. I was told that they could become precancerous, which is true, but we'll go back to that. And what that has meant for me is that I've had to be on hormone replacement therapy the rest of my life, and that I can never have biological children. Whereas if my testes had been retained, I would not have been able to make children through heteronormative sexual intercourse, but I would have had genetic material that could, with the use of an egg donor or whatever, I could have had a piece of me move on to the next generation. So I was sterilized as a kid, and I essentially underwent menopause as a kid because I had my hormone-producing organs removed from me. So I had hot flashes, and it affected the way that I developed mentally. And until I was hitting puberty, which is the time in intersex kind of medical treatment that they start giving you hormones, I was essentially a menopausal woman as like a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kid. And had also been told to just never talk to anyone about it because, you know, this is something that you can be persecuted for and people are going to make fun of you. And so not only that, but I grew up thinking I was alone like my whole life and didn't come out with who I was as a person until I was 27 years old in front of the Texas legislature. But anyway, so not only was I sterilized and all these things, but I was told that it was because my testes could become precancerous. But I'll give an analogous example, which there's a gene called the BRCA gene, which a lot of people are born with, which means that as a woman, you are genetically predisposed to breast and ovarian cancer. There's BRCA1 gene, there's BRCA2 gene. Depending on which gene you have X% chance of getting breast cancer or X% chance of getting ovarian cancer. So now in this age of genetic testing, a lot of people know that they have the BRCA gene from when they're very young. That doesn't mean that you see them removing little girls' ovaries and breasts because they might become cancerous one day. They're waiting until the little girls are old enough to have that conversation. You know, you might have breast cancer or ovarian cancer at X% chance one day. Would you like to, you know, have a hysterectomy or have a mastectomy to protect yourself, or would you like to keep those reproductive organs so you can develop in a biologically natural way and potentially have kids? And I'll tell you that like 99% of the time, you don't see little girls elected to be having their breasts taken out and their ovaries taken out. But what they're doing is they're engaging those young girls in a consensual conversation about their own bodies. Whereas for intersex kids, they don't ask us those things. And it's not because my testes were precancerous, it's because they were testes, and I was supposed to be a normal little girl. And that's still part of the medical practice because it is influenced by that societal stigma and shame that influences anyone who is not the normal, whether it's being intersex, whether it's being trans, whether it's being bisexual or gay, and that is still part of the medical practice today. And it's not always removing internal organs. Sometimes my friend Mo in Houston was born with both a penis and a vagina. They removed his penis. They told him he was a girl. He grew up, he's like, hey, actually I'm a boy. And you made that decision for me when I was 4 years old and I was too young to be part of that conversation. And so the irony of this whole situation is that trans people are fighting so hard to be able to have surgeries, to be able to be who they are, when we're having those same surgeries forced upon us when we're too young to say no. And no one knows about it because we're told as kids that we were fixed and that we should never talk about it again. And so while there are way more intersex people in the world than there are trans people, never to minimize anyone's issue, you would have never even heard about it. Everyone knows what a trans person is at this point. Everyone knows what a gay person is. And I would say like 90% of the LGBT community doesn't know what an intersex person is. So it's not just that the general society doesn't know, but we have all that ground to gain even within the LGBT community. And so that's why I'm here sharing my story, because whether it's trying to change the mind of a legislator on a piece of legislation, whether it's trying to change a doctor's mind who is operating without consent on children and making irreversible surgeries that change the way that they have sex, that they identify to the world, that they're able to develop hormonally, mentally, physically, or whether it's just forcing someone into a box that doesn't actually exist, the more that we start realizing, this is something that a problem that I have with the framing of the LGBTQIA movement on the whole, is calling it LGBTQIA, that's putting us in all these silos. And like, that's why I identify so much with what you said. It's the freaking human movement. We're all humans. Like, we're just all trying to live our humanity. Like, we face a lot of the same issues, we face some different issues, but what it boils down to is the less that we're trying to face, like, force people into boxes, whether it's through a surgery, whether it's through forcing them to use one bathroom or another, whether it's by fitting them into one letter in this LGBTQIA community. Like, we're all just humans, and the more that we talk about that and share our humanity with other people, the more the rest of the world is going to be able to understand that. And it might take years, but I know that for me, having shared my story, I've now met so many other intersex people like me that I didn't even know existed, and it's just helped so much with me being able to feel like I have a place in this world. And so that's what I hope that everyone in this room who's ever felt not black enough, not femme enough, not queer enough, not whatever enough to be in whatever community they're trying to identify in, realizing that there's no box that you need to fit into. Like, we're all a mixture of something. We're all multifaceted human beings. We're mothers, we're lovers, we're advocates, we're activists, and we don't need to fit into a box. So I hope that as I'm sharing my story, that y'all can help share the stories of other intersex people, because we have a lot more ground to gain at this point. And I would really appreciate y'all's help in helping us catch up. So thank you so much.
So my name is Emmett Schelling. I'm the executive director of the statewide trans-led org. It's Transgender Education Network of Texas, and also president of San Antonio Gender Association here in San Antonio. So I don't usually do the real personal stuff. Much like Julian, I like facts and numbers and things like that. Because talking about yourself, it does put you in a position where all those things that hurt, that it's a lot easier to compartmentalize and talk about. Our community on a whole is facing this than I went through this. So bear with me, I don't usually do this. So I guess I'll begin. I was born in Seoul, South Korea. I was there about 3 years and adopted and came to America. I grew up in a very small rural community, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but everybody was white except for me and a few people that were Mexican. So I already kind of grew up in this sort of skewed vision of what the world looked like, and in contrast to what I looked like. I remember being about, I think, 5 or 6, when I finally, apparently, it dawned on me that I didn't look like my mom, who was white. And I was like, Mom, why don't we look alike? And so we unpacked that conversation there. I grew up in a very conservative household myself, along with married the rest of the region. And so all of the things that, are sort of, you're not supposed to do if you want to be a good Christian, that was very fitting to how I was raised. It was very boxed in, it was very us and them, and I knew I didn't want to be them because I already kind of was them, and God forbid if I was them more, it was just going to be bad. With that said though, I was very also unapologetically who I am right now. So it was a very odd balance that I struck. It was kind of like being myself but not being too myself. My mom said that when I was little, I don't remember this, shortly after I was adopted, my sister thought that I should dress up in like doll clothes. And so commenced to chase me around the house and try to put on dresses while I screamed bloody murder, and subsequently ended up hurting myself trying to run away from her. So inherently, even at that age, I knew that what she was trying to dress me up as, it didn't feel right, it didn't feel good, and it felt bad enough for me to run away in horror and eventually hurt myself. Growing up, I fit in because I hung out with all guys. My like crew was a bunch of very like Midwestern, like bro-y kind of guys, and they accepted me somehow. And it was always kind of a very unspoken kind of thing where here I was and there they were and we were all kind of a crew, but there was something a little bit different, but they could look past it. As I got older, I realized more as I started reading about it because I was like, I don't fit in with the LGBTQIA community because I'm not gay. Like, that doesn't feel right, it doesn't fit me. And that was like the first tip off that something was wrong because everybody else, like, who started to get to know me very personally, they're like, oh, it's cool, you're gay. I'm like, I don't feel gay. So in looking into that, you know, I found out about the transgender community. And for me, it wasn't necessarily like a ta-da kind of moment. When I legally changed my name, my buddies back home were like, that makes sense. And so it wasn't this sort of pop out of the closet kind of moment for me. I was able to, and I am able to, and I think this brings in kind of the conversation of privilege, is I'm able to like walk out these doors and for the most part go unharassed. I don't necessarily deal personally a whole lot with having to out myself because I'm Asian, we're like a tiny people, so like people don't expect me to be like 6 foot. And so that kind of like idea of societal norm is already in place for me. So I really didn't go out of my way to be like, oh, everybody, like, I'm trans. However, this last year in 2017, the Texas state legislature decided to make it everybody's business when they decided to legislate within the bathrooms, as you know, we heard a little bit about. Previous to that, I'm gonna back up. Like I said, I'm not good at this personal stuff. And we watched one of, I think when we look back on it, the presidential election will go down historically, and we watched that happen. And as I watched it, I had always been comfortable in like, I don't necessarily need to stick my neck out because I'll be all right. But then when we watched it, I realized if people don't stand up, we're not gonna be all right. And there is, I think, that point where I remember I was like, I need to make a decision to be uncomfortable, to be willing to be out, and to be willing to be recognized within the community, within the media, and do something about it. Because I knew if we didn't do something collectively, things were going to be much worse than I think they even are now. So at that point, I started looking into leadership here in the local San Antonio community to see what I could do. And thankfully, I found a really great group of people that were already doing a lot of things for a lot, well, I don't want to say a lot of years, because that makes you sound old, Julian, but for a few years before me. And so I was able to connect, and really, they took me under their wing and taught me the things that I needed to know. As Ledge sort of approached, it got more and more heated, and the realization as we watched sort of the deaths of 2017 in the trans community rise quickly as the conversation kind of came to this blaring tone, I realized that there was more that maybe I could be doing. At that point, I stayed during this special session, which was called specifically by Governor Abbott to the tune of $1 million out of all of our pockets, as they tried to pass the bathroom bill that was not passed during regular session. During all of that, I sort of looked and I realized that there's a huge disparity. That in a lot of ways that I was lucky, a lot of people weren't. And at that point, I realized that sobering kind of reality that it was time for me to decide if I was going to dedicate my life to this or figure out what my part in all of this was going to be. Often in like the LGBTQIA community, previous to I think a lot of the legislation, we had heard a lot about the sexual orientation, and like everybody was like, you know, anti-marriage equality and all of this, but this new wave was very like trans specific. It targeted kids. It targeted everybody in the trans community, intersex community, and it was outright discrimination. And so at that point, I realized, you know, it was time for me to do something for the people that couldn't, for whatever reasons, because there are already so many obstacles. I won't go into them. But when we see supportive parents like Belinda, we realize when we see statistics where 41% of the trans community attempts suicide, and half of those people are successful, and that ties straight into the support that you either receive or you don't receive, and then you top that with a government that feels like they're going after these people. They're being kicked out of the military. They're being told in bathrooms, you know, that they're predators, that they're rapists. And when we see hard numbers that fly in the face of all of that, and we talk so much about, you know, other countries. Sorry, Emily, but I'm going to throw out the word shitholes. So we talk about that, but then we hear stories where in our country we have green-lighted literal genital mutilation on children because we want so badly to like adhere to these gender norms, and we want so badly to feel comfortable and that we can like put people in boxes and exist, and there's no question of who people are. So we can make sure we know if you're good or if you're bad or if you're us or you're them. And I think that at the end of the day, growing up and knowing I was always them, no matter how hard I tried to not be, no matter how great, you know, my life looked on the outside, like I was always them at the end of the day. And to know that and to realize when you see a strong, definitive push trying to other people even more than we already feel every day when we walk down the street. You know, it's, this is just what society is, I think, unfortunately, is you're always kind of looking around and comparing what's similar to that person or what's different. And we're already doing that, I think, and I think the time to stop it is really now. And the work that's being done here in San Antonio, in the state of Texas, that's first steps, but at this point, you know, we all need to support, we all need to learn more about our neighbors, and learn about the diversity of, I think, the community on a whole. When you said, you know, we put ourselves into these silos, I was like, well, yeah, because, you know, we all have these different needs and we all have different identities. But at the end of the day, like Belinda said, you know, the identity of human is really the most important thing at the end of the day when it all shakes out. And when you see all these things on the media or you read things, it's not just something I hope that you look at and think like, you know, sort of one-dimensional words. These are people's lives. The kids that have had to move out of Texas because of harassment and bullying and issues from not just their peers, but from their school, from the people that are put in authority to help school our kids, to help protect them, are going out of their way to do what they can to advocate against them. And I think at this point, that is a shameful place for all of us to be in, no matter who the kid is. No matter if it's a trans kid, if it's a black kid, if it's an Asian, Latinx, we shouldn't be supporting any sort of legislation that's trying to discriminate and other any child. So with that said, thank you for listening to me. I appreciate it, and thanks for coming out. And I'm gonna kick the mic over.